before 7th of October, the very small remaining Jewish community of Egypt had a lot of activities going that were engaged in by numbers of Muslim and Christian, mostly Muslim, friends of the Jewish community, people who were close to those in the community and found it important to help maintain the heritage and the history and the traditions of that very small, shrinking community. So for the major festivals, they would open one of Cairo's rather wonderful surviving synagogues, many of which have been renovated by the Egyptian government, and they would hold some kind of a service or a cultural event that would be attended by one or two of the remaining Jews, but then by maybe 30, 40, 60 other people, including people from some of the embassies in Cairo, Israeli embassy, American embassy, some of the European embassies. And then a whole lot of Egyptian Muslims who as I said, are interested and engaged in the endeavor of preserving Jewish heritage in Egypt, and are even, part of a group of volunteers who carry out a lot of work in terms of restoring and cleaning synagogues, looking after the cemetery, and so on. I think you mentioned Syria. There is a synagogue in Syria that is still functional, if you like. It's not been used for a while. There are only 7 Jews officially left in Syria, all of them in Damascus. There is a very ancient, wonderful synagogue in the Damascus suburb of Jobar that was 3/4 destroyed in the Civil War, and is a very sad sight at the moment. But there's talk of trying to rebuild it, trying to restore it among some of the expatriate Syrian Jewish community in the US. In Iraq, there is a synagogue in Baghdad, which is well preserved, beautiful synagogue. But it's just absolutely too dangerous to use that synagogue. And there really are just 1 or 2 Jews left, officially anyway, in Iraq. Mostly in Baghdad, possibly 1 or 2 in Iraqi Kurdistan. Well, those 2 countries are different in the sense that they have, comparatively speaking, many more Jews. It's still, the numbers are not large. There are around perhaps 1,500 people in each of those countries. The big difference, though, is that there really is still a Jewish life and a Jewish community in both places. In Tunisia, that would be particularly on the island of Djerba, where there's an ancient community of Jews in southern Tunisia living as they have done for centuries. But also around the capital, Tunis, a much smaller, aging Jewish population, but still active. Morocco, as you know, the main community is in Casablanca, but there's also, a small but still active community in Marrakesh. I think the other cities, the communities are pretty small and not really very active. But still in Casablanca, still in Marrakesh, one gets a sense of Jewish life being lived. Schools, synagogues, all being used and looked after. People walking around in kippas, in the Jewish skull caps. As I saw in the middle of Casablanca. In a Muslim country, that's kind of amazing. People who are very obviously rabbis walking around near the Neve Shalom school in the middle of Casablanca. And I think particularly in Morocco, and unfortunately one can't say this about Tunisia at the moment, there is clearly an official desire and effort and push to maintain the community, to protect the community, to cherish the community and to preserve the community. And in that sense, Morocco is unique, very fascinating, I think, for anyone, and certainly for me, looking at all these different countries and comparing them. It's wonderful to see these places still standing and often very beautiful. And it's incredibly sad to see them empty and not being used. There is an absolutely beautiful synagogue in Beirut, for instance, that was restored with funds from Lebanese Jews overseas in Brazil and in the US, and is really very stunning. But it's never used. It's only open to show visitors, diplomats or officials visiting. And so there's a real emptiness there that is not just an absence of people, it's an absence of, anything that a synagogue is supposed to function as or represent. Essentially that synagogue and others, the one in Baghdad, very sad as well. You just feel the absence of Jewish life, of Jewish ritual. It's great that these buildings in some cases have been preserved. As I mentioned, the Egyptian government has been renovating many synagogues in Cairo, and also an absolutely stunning synagogue in Alexandria, because the Egyptian state regards Jewish heritage as Egyptian heritage. I mean, that's the reason why they spend millions of dollars on synagogues. I do ask myself the question, not exactly what's the point, but what are these buildings for if they're not being used for, their original purpose? I mean, yes, I'd rather that they are there than that they're not there, but there's something, there's a real kind of gaping hole when you look at all these built environments, because I think, heritage and history, it's about more than bricks and mortar, and if you want to preserve Jewish heritage in countries where the people are disappearing or have disappeared, then you need to do more than just look after the synagogues and the cemeteries. So yes, I think, as a Jewish person, but perhaps also just as someone with a sense of history, it's pretty sad, I think, to visit these places. I've seen some terribly neglected cemeteries as well, which are really quite upsetting, because, they are people's parents and family and grandparents and great-grandparents who are in these sort of awfully neglected places, some of them. And, I find that really quite upsetting. There's a real question about what do you do with the physical heritage of a culture and a community that has been there for 2,000 years plus and has almost disappeared. What do you do with those things, and how do you best preserve memory, heritage, culture, history?